Welcome back, 365 Sports. Josh Neighbors, now part of the 365 Sports family on the Crystal Ball College Football channel, of which Garrett and Jack also have a podcast, the College Football Chaos podcast, which is Wednesdays at noon. Josh's show is up by 2 o'clock every day, if not before. And I was on Josh's podcast last night, so I thought, what a great way. Let's cross-promote on either channel back-to-back days. Josh, thanks so much for hopping on short notice today, especially Big 12 media poll out yesterday. Texas picked first. Are you buying the Longhorns as the eventual conference champion?
Yeah, there's a combination of things here, and it's great to be on the channel. It's great to be with the network. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you guys so much. It's a combination of things, right? It's a strength of the league thing. It's also this team is just so talented, and they're going through what is a pretty natural winning progression. Winning is not linear. A lot of times in college football, theirs kind of looks like it might be, right? Stacking talent, getting better on the line of scrimmage, 5-7, going to 8-5 last year. It kind of all makes sense. So I'm buying it. I'm buying the fact that quarterbacks get better as they get older. I think Will Howard's a great example of that last year. Max Duggan, a great example of that. Quinn Ewers, not quite that much experience, but I think it's reasonable to think that, you'd have to play pretty poorly to screw up this array of talent that they have. I mean, they're so loaded at all of the skill positions. And they're also on defense too, pretty deep. It was a good unit last year. They've got playmakers at all three levels. So I think it's pretty reasonable to think that this Texas team should be in Arlington. It'd be a massive disappointment, in my opinion, if they did not make the Big 12 championship game.
Josh, did you pick them as your Big 12 favorite in the media poll?
I did. Yes, I had them 1, Kansas State 2, I think, which most folks had.
Yeah. What about your? I don't want to go through our entire teams here, but I am curious about the QB1 spot. Were you a Quinn Ewers guy? Were you a Jalen Daniels guy? A Will Howard? How did you view that?
So, because I was talking to some folks about this, I'm not sure how you all do it. Some folks think it's a predictive thing.
Right.
I don't know if it's predictive or if it's I still struggle with this. Is it the best quarterback going into the year? If you made me pick one quarterback that I had to have, I'd pick Jalen Daniels.
Okay.
I picked my offensive player of the year to be Quinn Ewers because that is a stupid amount of talent to have around you. And Jalen Daniels does not have that luxury. Now, he might put up some really ridiculous numbers, but the thing is, if they win 6 games again, which I think is challenging, considering Kansas is still not that good, relative to, the rest of the league, I think. Do you give a guy on a 6-win team offensive player of the year or stuff like that? So if I do QB1 right now, I think Jalen Daniels is kind of the best, but I went hybrid. So I did Will Howard, right? I think they're going to win enough. And I think he's a good enough player to where it kind of satisfies both criteria. So I went with Will Howard as kind of the guy I like the most heading into this year, also on a winning team.
Josh, was anybody snubbed in your opinion on that Big 12 team?
I mean, I didn't see any spot where I was like, it shouldn't be there. I think pretty much across the board, I was fine with every selection. I don't get really that upset about the preseason polls and whatnot. I think maybe for the predictive of where people finish, there's some stuff. I mean, Oklahoma third felt gratuitous. I think that was Oklahoma being third, but when it comes to the actual teams themselves, nothing really caught my eye as too much as slanderous, if you will.
So there's a lot of schools of thought on Oklahoma and where to slot them or what to expect from them. And I'm a fan, and I don't quite know what to expect. I see all the reasons to believe, starting with the schedule and just having a year under their belts, why they should be improved. I also see the reasons to believe that there's some cracks in the foundation for the first time in 2 decades that are actually maybe dangerous. Where do you kind of fall on that line with Oklahoma and entering the final year of the Big 12?
So the one thing that they're trying to do is establish an identity. And you heard about a lot of this when it came to their approach in practice and whatnot, especially on defense. You heard a lot about a lot of positive change in terms of habits and whatnot, but that did not manifest itself on the field last year for them. Their defense after that Nebraska game was a complete nightmare, essentially the rest of the way of the season. It looked like an Alex Grinch unit, still, even though he was gone at that point in time. I mean, it's hard to doubt Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel. I don't think they're going to have bad back-to-back, or I guess subpar, kind of off and on back-to-back years. I just wonder like how much of an overhaul on defense is going to happen. They've still got a pretty high level of talent. I mean, you could argue they have the second most talented roster pound for pound in the entire league, but they did have their first losing season since I was an infant child. Like that is something that happened last year. And Brent Venables did not have any answers. Like Baylor came into that game knowing exactly, everybody knew what Baylor was going to do. They're going to run it right at Oklahoma. And they did. They did it pretty easily. And that's pretty alarming to me. You have a coach who hangs his hat on that, and your team just looked pretty woefully unprepared and couldn't stop what was coming at them against what was, to be honest, a pretty average Baylor team. And Texas Tech let them have it, late in the year as well. I mean, it just wasn't, the Texas game was a complete embarrassment. Like that team, for as loaded as they were, should have had some more answers than they did against Texas. And just losing the quarterback was not a good enough reason to get drilled like that. And they did. So Brent Venables, for as good of a coordinator as he is, and I mean, you could argue he's maybe the best coordinator in the last 10 years. They did not have a whole lot of answers as a head coach, but I mean, Dave Aranda didn't have many answers in his first year as well. So I don't know what to make of them. I really don't know what to make of them, but I do feel pretty confident in saying I don't think they're going to be in the Big 12 championship game this year. I don't feel strongly about that.
Josh, can you sell me on West Virginia finishing above last place?
That's so funny. I was talking to a couple West Virginia folks either yesterday or it was yesterday. I mean, yeah, like they might not finish last, but man, they might give up in the first month of the season. The schedule is brutal. It's absolutely brutal for them. And I'm shocked they've recruited as well as they have, considering the fact that their coach, I don't know how he's selling kids on any vision when he's not, he needs to win like 8-9 games, in my opinion, to retain his job. So I think, like, if you told me, okay, roster wise, like, sure, they shouldn't be there. But if this thing falls off a cliff from the word go, then what is West Virginia playing for? A lot of those guys will find themselves in the portal. And I mean, I feel bad. Like there's a situation where CJ Donaldson might get ridden into the ground this year, which, if they do that, they might lose him in the offseason. You might want to go somewhere else and play, if I find a different opportunity. And that could happen for other guys on the team. So the schedule for them in the end is not that bad. But if it goes sideways early, like what are we playing for? And I think that might crush their season and put them in last place.
Yeah, man, that transfer portal element of like now you're not even so much worried about, I mean, there's the job part of it, or hey, I might have to fire an assistant, but now you're like, I got to keep my roster together. They're all going to go to the portal. And you're right, like CJ Donaldson would be a prime guy to go get a bag somewhere from somebody. In terms of the newcomers, who do you like the most and why? In terms of this year, yeah.
Yeah, I think UCF's kind of the one that we look at. I think I'll give that edge because of coaching. I am a Gus Malzahn fan. I don't think Auburn should have ever fired him. I know that some of the sweep stuff and the motion gets a little too cute and it kind of costs them sometimes, but he's a really good football coach. I mean, you think about the guys, like, there's a short list of guys who've had success against coaches like Nick Saban, and he is one of them. And so I think he like wants to be there. It's a pretty good kind of riding off into the sunset job. I'm sure the wife loves it down there, and it's a good spot. It's pretty easy to recruit to. You were a successful SEC head coach. So getting guys who are considering SEC schools that might say, all right, well, coach, Malzahn's offering more playing time. He also has had success with players like me before. I mean, I think it's a really good situation to be in. The one thing for them this year, they've got playmakers. I don't trust John Rice Plumlee as a passer. I think in situations, if you make him a pure passer, it's not going to go incredibly well for you. So that's my question is, if he gets banged up at all, like that thing could head south in terms of like their passing game. But they do have playmakers, and I do think that is the one thing for them that helps them. But the issue for all of these schools is this. Last year, like you'd follow up Tulane with ECU or Navy. That especially now that Kansas is good, that's not happening here anymore. I'll even give you Iowa State from last year. They were horrible on offense. Their defense was gangbusters all year. Yeah, we all talked about the stats. Like if they'd scored 20 points in the first 10 games, they would have won 7 or 8 of them. It's crazy how good their defense was, but how bad their offense was. That's one of the easier teams to play. West Virginia, as bad as they were, swept the Oklahoma schools last year, and they went 5-7. That is one of the easier teams to play. So that is the challenge. Your Navy's, your bad version, I could say whatever bad version of SMU would be. Your bad, ECU, like those are decent schools, but those are 6-win teams in a G5 conference. So you exchange those for Oklahoma State and Kansas State and Kansas, right? And so, like, you know, I mean, guys, there's an argument that Jalen Daniels could be the best player in the field in like 11 of the 12 games he plays in this year.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, and that's what you're now dealing with in this league. So I think that's the big challenge. But if you'd ask me, all right, athletically, coaching wise, I think UCF is the answer. But full disclosure, I'm doing the deep dives. I want to do my deep dives on those schools later on in the summer, just because I'm so familiar with the Big 12 schools. I think the closer to the season I really evaluate those new schools, the better kind of feel we'll have for it as if we head in.
Josh, what's your look? I'll just ask you we can clip this and put it on our Baylor channel. What's your take on Baylor this year?
Up here. I'm buying the dip. So last year I was a little bit kind of tepid on Baylor. And the reason why is Blake Shapen. I didn't, you know, I hadn't seen enough to be like, all right, this can be great. I mean, the first half was awesome against Oklahoma State, but let's be honest, the injury went down in the second half and he hadn't played that much. And so I think he's coming into this skill group they have now has to develop together. And I said this a bunch, like, I would not be shocked if he's very good this year because he had a full year as a starter, had a lot of trials and tribulations, injuries and whatnot. I think the one reason I'm concerned, though, is that they were at their best last year when they minimized how important the quarterback position was, right? That little stretch they had, I forgot who else they played in that middle stretch, but it was kind of in that little moment where they beat Oklahoma. It felt like their best ball was running it. They still have that wide zone. It still kind of terrifies a lot of schools because it's just, I mean, they're so efficient with it. They have arguably the best running back in the league. I'm going to buy the dip on Baylor this year. I'm not, you know, I trust Dave Aranda to have the defense in some relatively decent form as well. And I think it's also a tough team to beat most of the time when they're at home. I think when the fans, you know, when they're engaged and the team is playing well, that is a difficult place to go in. So I would not be shocked if I saw Baylor in the Big 12 championship game this year. That is not one of the teams I'd be shocked to see in the Big 12 championship game, just because they've got a coach who I think is just as good as anybody at evaluating what happened before and is very honest about it with himself and everybody else, and then making those adjustments.
All right, right now, gun to your head, which is a phrase I don't like, but I thought I would use it. But Big 12 championship.
Kansas State and Texas. I mean, K-State is bringing back most of the group that did it last year. And then Texas is just, it's their time. I mean, this is the best chance they're going to have a winning conference title in maybe, like, you go either way, the future or the past, in a decade. Because I'm not sure the SEC is going to present that opportunity in the immediate short term for them. So they've got the money in the bank briefcase, to use a wrestling term. They got to cash that son of a gun in. This is the moment for them. They have to get there. And then Kansas State, I mean, it's just the balance. Like, I feel pretty confident in Will Howard, which is a weird thing because I was ready to give up on him last year. I didn't think he was that good, you know, before he started playing well. And that group is together. The most important part of the team, the offensive line, is there. They've got good skill weapons. Their defense, you know, I know they lost some guys, but they still have retained a pretty solid core of guys. I think it'd be a fool's errand to bet against Chris Kleiman now that he's kind of got that thing rolling. So it's hard to pick two teams that aren't, you know, that aren't them as kind of the matchup.
All right, Josh, let's pitch the neighborhood watch to our audience here. You've got them captive right now for the next couple minutes. What are they getting? When can they see it on the Crystal Ball College Football channel?
5 days a week, 5+ days a week, Big 12 coverage. We interview great folks like Paul Catalina. He was on the show. We also had Mark Ziegler on recently. Andrew Marchand will be on the show. Andy Staples will be coming on, you know. So you'll see different guests you've seen across the networks. Talk gambling. We'll use those lines, obviously, to look at the season. We have team previews going through for every single Big 12 school right now. And we hit the conference realignment stuff as well. And we hit it often. And the goal, I appreciate you, Paul, said it, the goal is to have it up by 2 p.m. every day. Scheduling, as you know, it can be difficult sometimes to pin folks down. But yeah, usually around 1:30, 2 o'clock every single day. We're coming out with the show over there on College Football Crystal Ball. It's a great time, and I appreciate you folks for giving me a new home, and I appreciate everybody who has come back, and the new folks as well. Also, if you missed me, hey, I'm here now. Go to Crystal Ball College Football. That is where you guys can find me, and you can find the Neighborhood Watch. There you go, Josh Neighbors. Josh, glad to have you aboard. We'll see you on Wednesday. Pleasure, gentlemen. That's Josh Neighbors, Crystal Ball College Football. Go like and subscribe to that channel as well. It helps us out.
And Josh, that was